Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Ruby Batian NX Natural Processed Kenya from Coffea Circulor. And there's the bag right there. And Coffea Circulor, based out of Gothenburg, Sweden. And this coffee was featured in a recent blind taste test rankings video where it finished 6th place out of 8 Coffea Circulor coffees on that day. And when originally purchasing this coffee, I was undecided as to whether or not we'd review it, as we'd reviewed it for the very first time about 4 years ago now. And the original intention of purchasing this coffee this time around was to see how it had changed over the years, as well as give a bunch of samples to some people that had never tried it before. But to my surprise, this coffee was significantly different from the initial experience that we did have from it. So for that reason, I felt like it was worth re-reviewing. So it'll definitely be interesting to see how it turned out, as this right here is day 50. And recipe we went with for this coffee was our standard recipe at a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 96 degrees Celsius, about 205 degrees Fahrenheit. And like this one best through the Chemex, which does indicate a more medium grind. Roast profile for this coffee. This one is also mostly in line with our recent experiences with Coffea Circulor, which we have continuously described as being on the more moderately light side of things. Though given the processing of this one, I felt like they might have gone just a little further, and it's a little closer to the Giburi, which we had also recently reviewed from Coffea Circulor. And that one we also described as being on the more moderately light side of things, with maybe a slight bit more development in comparison to some of the other coffees that we did review from them in this set. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 15, which was of course the blind taste test day, and there's a lot to discuss with what happened on that blind taste test. So on the first run through, this coffee did not necessarily stand out. There were quite a few other processed coffees on that table, but there was one moment, and you can go back and watch the video, where it all clicked as I went through it, and I immediately said, this has to be Ruby Batian. The way that the intensity is translating, this coffee just has to be based off of the previous experiences that we have had, though it was definitely different from the other ones. But there is something unmistakable about the way that Ruby Batian presents itself in terms of the intensity to it. So while it did have a little bit of that spiced bergamot IPA quality, which has been consistent in a number of other Coffea Circulor coffees, there was such a strong, almost artificial blueberry pie feel in such an intense sense that this coffee just stood out so much more in comparison to the other coffees on that table. And especially when trying it out after the blind taste test and being like, this coffee is just so different from everything else. It's amazing that it didn't translate the first time around going through, but the second time after the coffee had cooled down, it was about as blatantly obvious as possible. I think what happened was initially that spiced feel, which was common in some of the other coffees, did seem to hinder just how intense the fruit qualities of this coffee were. But as it had cooled down, it was unmistakable, very direct coffee. Day 18 through the Chemex, and the coffee is wild today as it continues to offer a very prominent artificial sugary quality that's reminiscent of cotton candy, in line with the listed cherry candy. So the previous iteration of Ruby Batian that we had stood out because they had something along the lines of a yellow plum note listed on here, and I had never had such a clean and well-defined stone fruit quality in any natural processed coffee up to that point, and especially one that was a natural processed Kenyan coffee. So I was just stunned by that experience, but this one is equally as stunning in the way that it presents that candied quality to it, because it's just so unbelievably sugary, and there are very few coffees that we've reviewed on this channel that rival it in terms of the sugariness. Think of the most sugary coffees we've ever had. The Tioxy Pepe from Manhattan a couple of years ago, the original run of Lady Bermudez or Luna Bermudez. Those sort of coffees where they're just that wildly sugary and that wildly intense. That's what we were getting from this one once again. Not much outside of that direct experience, but it was very well defined in that regard. That cherry candy, that cotton candy, just about as direct as you might expect. Day 21 through the UFO brewer, and the coffee continues to act a fair bit wild, as there was a strong fruity pebbles aroma to the whole beans and a strong Luna Bermudez artificial blueberry quality to the cup itself, as it's the most dominant fruit characteristic to it. Otherwise, there's more of a cotton candy feel, as the candied intensity of this coffee is presented once again in a just immense sense, with very little fermentiness or funkiness to it. So Strange coffee. It's very, very different from the first time we'd ever had Ruby Batian. Day 24 through the V60 with Coffea Circulor's recipe, and the coffee is ever changing as there's a little bit more of that spiced bergamot IPA quality that has been consistent with not just Coffea Circulor coffees in the past, but this most recent run, almost all of them seemed to have it. What's kind of funny is that the only ones that didn't have it were the Panamanian Geshes that we'd reviewed from them. Outside of that, there is a little bit more of an intense Luna Bermudez feel, as I should say, Diego Bermudez feel, as there's that red lollipop candy that's in line with the original run of Diego Bermudez that we'd also had from Manhattan, and that's also on par with the listed cherry candy note that they have on here. Day 27, do the Chemex with the same adjustments, and it has seemed to heighten a little bit of the bergamot spiced qualities to it, as toning this coffee down didn't seem to help, which is kind of strange to me, but it is still skewing a little bit more in that spiced IPA bergamot-like quality. Outside of that, there was a little bit more robustness, and that's kind of what I'm alluding to with this coffee being a slight bit more developed than the other ones that we did have from them. But outside of that, the strong Luna Bermudez berry qualities continue to remain the most dominant characteristic of this coffee. Day 30 through the V60 with our standard recipe, and the coffee continues to be a very wild ride as it's a bit more in line with these stone fruits this time around, giving it a little bit more of a similarity to the previous Ruby Batian that we'd reviewed. Wild coffee still, very strong sweetness, especially in the berry sense, and I'm going to keep going back to that because even though I want to highlight and focus on the other qualities of this coffee, that was just too intense to be ignored throughout any point of this coffee. Day 36 through the Chemex with our standard recipe, and the coffee was the best it had been to this point, which is why we settled on this recipe, as it's offering more of the wildness to the berry qualities, as it's unnaturally sweet. This coffee it shouldn't be this sweet. I can't really explain it. There's a little less of the stone fruits this time around, but the berry quality is about as dominant and direct as possible. Not too different from the way that Luna Bermudez presents itself, just that overbearing, overly heavily sugary intensity to it. Void of fermentiness, void of funkiness, so I don't really know what to make of that. Final notes, we have day 42 through the Chemex with our standard recipe, and it did feel like the coffee might have dropped off ever so slightly, as it wasn't quite as wild this time around, but it's still expectedly berry forward in a very intense sense, and I ran out of space for notes. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. Okay, we have 3 level 5s. Let's go through those. I don't think any of them will come as a surprise whatsoever. Finish level 5. If there's anything that can be said about the finish not being level 5, it's that Letty, Luna, Diego, the super processed coffees can be a slight bit more long-lasting, lingering than the way that this coffee did present. I mean, you're tasting this coffee for an extended period of time, but maybe as opposed to those coffees being like 20 minutes, 25 minutes, this one right here is what, like 10 minutes or something. It does have a pretty long-lasting feel to it. It's not really surprising given just how intense this coffee is. Sweetness, level 4, or level 5, definitely minimum level 5. Classic one of those coffees that could be a level 7 if the chart went up that high. It is literally outside of the charts with how sweet this coffee is. I can't really expand upon that any further. It is immensely sugary to the point where it's just so unbelievably unnatural and artificial that I don't really know what to make of how sweet this coffee is. On par with those super processed coffees in terms of the sweetness. Level 5 is where we have it on this tasting wheel. Level 7 is where we have it in reality. Berry fruit, level 5, that's another one. It's probably level 6, level 7. They have the cherry candy listed on here, but again, for me, it felt like Luna Bermudez, and for that reason, it's a little bit more reminiscent of a blueberry pie for me throughout the entirety of this coffee, and given that it's not funky or fermenty, it works just fine for me. Level 5 is where we opted to put that. Those 3 things definitely go together. Super immensely sweet, sugary berry quality to it. They also have that cherry candy note listed on here, and I can see that. Cotton candy is another thing that I can see. It's just sugar. All right, let's go and move on to the level 4s. We just have 2 of them, so we'll discuss only one of them, the stone fruit level 4. I think that they have a mango note listed on here. The previous Ruby Batian had that yellow plum note, which was my favorite quality of Ruby Batian on its initial run, and one of my favorite things that stood out about any Coffea Circulor coffee in the past. But level 3 is where we opted to put that, or level 4 is where we opted to put that. Let's go ahead and move on to the level 3s real quick. We'll start with the acidity level 3. Okay, this is a Kenyan coffee. This is a Batian, and it scored a level 3 because it's not necessarily that bright. And even with it being natural, I think I would fully expect it to be super bright, but it's really not, and it's kind of toned down. So make of that whatever you will. I really don't have an explanation for that at all. Spice level 3, that spice bergamot characteristic is yet again hindering the overall experience of this coffee, because I do wonder how it might have been different if it was completely void and absent in this experience, but it's prominent enough to the point where we have it scoring pretty high there at that level 3 mark. Citrus level 3, I can say maybe a little bit of that bergamot characteristic is where that comes into play. A lot of the brightness comes from the citrus of this coffee too, so that gives it a strange bit of depth. Let's go ahead and move on from there. The body level 3, plenty of texture to this one, even with it being brewed through the Chemex. I think that was somewhat expected for it being a processed Kenyan coffee, but yeah, given that this coffee transcends any rules or expectations that we had for it going into it, it's just medium bodied. Don't have too much to add to that. And then final thing worth discussing, definitely the most important thing worth discussing, cleanliness level 4. You can see it in so many of our reviews of coffees that are like this when it comes to something like Lady Bermudez, Luna Bermudez. I'm trying to think of other examples of this. We've definitely had even some El Diviso coffees that they're about as well defined as you can expect. The sugary quality of this coffee is about as well defined as you can expect. It just so happens to be unbelievably intense. And given that it is lacking any sort of fermentiness or heaviness or funkiness to it, I mean, there's a slight bit of it, but not any more so than your average natural processed coffee out there. If anything, significantly less of it. So that's why, especially given the very strong definition of this coffee, we bumped it up there to that level 4 mark. It feels almost wrong to put it there at the level 4 mark, but given just how well defined it is, I don't think I really have any other option but leaving it there at that level 4 mark. So strange looking tasting wheel, but as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it is a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. In one of those previous Coffea Circulor reviews, I mentioned that I did open up all of these Coffea Circulor bags alongside some other people, and this was the one that stood out the most for having the most unusual aroma. And initially I was curious as to whether or not the aromas of these coffees would actually translate into the cup itself, and this one was by far the one that translated the most, as I've brewed this coffee for a couple of people too, and they've just been blown away by the way that it tastes. And I've even gotten some feedback from people that I did give samples to, and they were surprised at how this coffee turned out. I've also heard other people describe this coffee as being reminiscent of Luna Bermudez. So this coffee, it is not similar at all to the original Ruby Batian, and that's the main reason why I felt like it was worth re-reviewing, because these are two essentially completely different coffees, the way that they do play out. And this one's above my area of knowledge or area of expertise, because I can't explain anything that happened within this review, and that in itself is kind of fun, and one of the main reasons why I do enjoy Coffea Circular's Kenyan coffees in the way that I do. I don't know. I don't know what to say about this coffee. It left me speechless. It's the strangest coffee I think we've reviewed this entire year, which is saying something. We review a lot of strange coffees, so this one's strange. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to. If you do like your super processed, very intense, very sweet, very sugary, very berry forward coffees, this one's an excellent fit for you. It offers all of those things in a very well-defined and pronounced sense. So that, coupled with the very overly berry forward experiences, if you enjoyed Luna Bermudez, I can see you enjoying this coffee. I had a very hard time getting through an entire cup of it, but the experience in itself is so unique, so wild, and so out there that it's definitely one of those coffees that I feel like a lot of people should experience, even just once for themselves. I think that's kind of the best direction I can point somebody towards on this one, and also the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to hear your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here is my review of the Ruby Batian NX, natural processed Kenya from Coffea Circulor. Thank you for watching.